Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club. You listen to the Coaches Panel.
Dane Zorko here from the Brisbane Lions.
Jason Johannesson from the Western Bulldogs.
Luke Parker here from the Sydney Swans.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Orr, Melbourne Football Club.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, you got MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well and trust you're enjoying the 50 most relevant for 2023. We are almost done, can you believe it? Today, the number 5 player in my 50 most relevant, Carlton defender Sam Docherty. He is the last defender listed this year in the 50 most relevant. Why is he where he is? Let's be honest, he's a pretty good fantasy football option for us across the formats. Joining me on this episode for his first time in 2023, if you've been a long time fantasy football nut, chances are you've seen him across the Twitterverse. You've also heard him across the 50 most relevant over the past couple of years. I got McRath. Hello, buddy. How are you?
MJ, mate, thanks for having me on again. Such a pleasure to sit down, have a yarn, and what a podcast to get me on for. First one of the year. Number 5, Sam Doc, absolute legend.
Yeah, he's a really big, important prospect for us to have a pretty serious conversation about. 29 years of age defender, and we'll talk about the comeback that we experienced in 2022, but it did bring us some really nice fantasy scores across the year. The top score of the year in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team was a 138 against the Hawks, while it was a 144 against the Richmond Football Club. His highest ever scores, though, from a career perspective, both of them are nowhere really near that. Back in 2017 against the Swans for AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, it was a 159, while in 2020 for SuperCoach, it was a 185 against the Bombers. That really strong season last year means you are paying up some big dollars for him. He is just a touch over $1 million in Dream Team. That's because he's averaged a 110.3. In AFL Fantasy, where it's the same average point, a 977K. While in SuperCoach, his average of 109.6 means he's at a price point just a touch over $600,000. And McRath, we probably should be putting Doc into the 50 most relevant, not just because of the fantasy year that he delivered across the formats, but what he had to overcome in his personal life and health is deserving enough of a spot to be applauded for what he's done.
I mean, we're talking about one of the most respected guys in the game now, right? He's missed 2.5 years, at both times at the peak of his powers. The first time with the ACL coming off All-Australian, and then just he was getting back from his second ACL, comes back and midway through, averaging almost a ton, has a cancer setback. And then he just uses that to come back stronger than ever. And not just stronger, he's our top-rated defender going in 2023. Absolute legend, and rightly so, a fantasy star.
Yeah, he is. He came 3rd in the AFL per game for kicks, 6th for effective disposals, 6th for uncontested possessions, while he's in the top 20 for marks, disposals, metres gained, and rebound 50. So often, Carlton, when they were in a jam, or they were wanting to change play, or they were wanting to set up the play, Docherty was instrumental across those flanks and also pushing up through the wings, setting up what that Carlton Football Club did want to achieve last year. Let's dive into his fantasy data. He averaged 110 in Dream Team and Fantasy for us last year. 16 tons. Yeah, that guy can score okay. 7 of those he was able to convert into 120-plus scores, and there's a bunch of 130s layered across the season. So he's got captaincy potential about him. Just the 2 scores all year under the 80 marker, and as the season went on, he got better. Before the buys, he was running at an average of 105.8. Post the buys, goes at a 114.7. In AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, ranked 1st for all defenders by average and by points. 6th overall in that format for the highest average, and only 2 players scored more points than Sam Docherty last year in Fantasy and Dream Team, Andrew Brayshaw and Callum Mills. Let's talk about his SuperCoach season. An average of 109.6, 14 tons across the 22 games he played. A bunch of those, 10, converted into 120-plus scores. And just like in fantasy, plenty of those were converted into 130-plus scores. Just twice he dropped under 80 all year. And talk about a picture of consistency. Pre-buy, he goes at 109.8. Post-buy, 109.6. Of all defenders, fourth by average, third for total points of all our defenders in SuperCoach, while overall, 13th overall 4 points. That's a pretty stunning season, isn't it, McRath?
Just perfect, really. I mean, you won't find a better season from a defender, let alone a player, really, if not for a few absolute freaks of nature, the likes of Laird and Brayshaw. We'd be talking about this season, as one of the greatest. Not even considering what he's gone through, but I think I really like to look back at 2022 and see how that came about, because he did go up, almost 12 points from before he got struck down. And I think a few factors really came together and everything broke his way. And the important thing, which I'll get to in a sec, is nothing has changed. In fact, things will improve. So the narrative is really, really strong. End of 21, Michael Voss comes in, who was his first coach at the Lions, and absolutely released the shackles on Doc. First thing he did was, had that hard conversation, and Doc stood down from captaincy duties and let Cripper go alone, and he was set free, and he averaged, 25% of contested possession, 7 marks, 3.5 tackles, nearly 30 touches a game, as you mentioned, and converted 73% of the time to a fantasy ton, which is huge. I mean, the man deserves a lifetime of good karma after what he went through. But I think it's going to start and continue paying off, right? I mean, you mentioned he has a strong floor, the high ceiling, and he's been trialled in the middle. I mean, a few of the very short sample size, but those 2 games he went into the middle exclusively in the last fortnight of the season with Carlton's troubles. He averaged, he went 123 and 137 when they gave him bulk CBAs. It was like over 75%.
Yeah, 75 and 88% in those 2 games. So in those 2 games, he goes 130 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team and 129.5 in SuperCoach. So
just stupid, really. And look, I think you went through it. There's no downside, right? There's no, weak point. I've spent a couple of days trying to popped some holes in it, looked at him, how he scores in wins and losses, 2 or 3 points aside, the start of season, end of season, no difference. His midfield split was a lot bigger than the, playing in halfback, but not drastically, right? But if you look at it from a checklist, he's got a fantasy-friendly role with potential upside. He's had flawless preseason. He has been trialling in the mids, and the last few match sims, he has been exclusively in the midfield. There's been minimal external change. And he's a captaincy option. I know you will ask me about a couple of injuries. One key injury, though, that could impact him. So if you want to go with that, and then we can lead down the devil's advocate role.
Well, let's do that. So he played 2 games in the midfield last year due to just the lack of soldiers that Carlton had towards the end of the year. So it was more a forced move initially, but that doesn't mean it doesn't become a new normal. That happened with Rory Laird too during the 2020 season. The Crows were just getting destroyed for experience through the midfield. Let's throw our halfbacker that knows how to win and use the ball. Oh my goodness, this is a really great move. So the fact he's training there is interesting to me. And there are those 2 injuries that we alluded to. So I'm keen on your take, and then we want to unpack that a little bit more. Sam Walsh, back injury. It looks like he won't be back any earlier than round 4 or 5. It could be longer than that, but he certainly won't be there by the time round 1 gets underway. The other is one of their more expensive players in Zach Williams is done with an ACL. So my question is this. Is Docherty, just because he's so good in those spots, a bit of a Selly's gap filler that moves around? Will we see some positional volatility, or is your perspective he plays through the mids, or then the last bit, or actually it doesn't matter, he'll score anywhere?
Look, the long and short of it is that, yes, that last part is true, right? He can score. He's shown that he can score, nearly 110 points a game as a defender. He's shown that he can come in and dominate where needed. I think the Walsh injury probably sees him spend a lot more mid time, probably pure mid for the first month or so to feel that, because I think he is, a point of difference and offers the next best out of that, Carlton midfield rotation. They are trialling him there for a reason. Do I think he's going to be a midfield for all of this year? No, I don't. Luckily, the Blues are gifted in a way that they have a lot of strong depth down back. You know, they've got Adam Sard. They've got Nick Newman, who is sort of underrated. They've got Plowman, who's reliable. Marchbank, who's, you know, reasonably fit again, reasonably. Mitch McGovern, who's currently fit. And if he stays fit, he's a huge difference maker. We've got a couple of young kids as well. So they are pretty well stocked back there. But I think Doc will move back as Walsh comes in. And it's a good trial, I guess, to see that should something happen again, they've got an absolute jet that can just step in there. So I think all the training in the midfield and the pre-season is probably to get him ready there for that situation if it does happen longer term. But, you know, in fantasy terms, I reckon he'll come out of the blocks and probably go gangbusters with a bit more mid-time, a lot more mid-time. And then he'll probably settle back into what we knew. But, you know, at the end of the day, you're still probably going to get 110 average, potentially more. So, you know, can you wait on him in fantasy, SuperCoach? I don't think you can. There won't be a good time to buy him.
Well, I think that's a good point that you made there around there are some players that always give you a look, whether it's 1 or 2 weeks, either via tag or the ball doesn't come towards them. Zach Merritt's the perfect example where you go, I know by the end of the year, you're going to be there and thereabouts. However, you will be value for me at some point in the year. Just purely based on what we know from Docherty under this Voss system, let alone previous eras of fantasy performance, he genuinely doesn't get a look. And the fact that it's, albeit a small sample size, he's got ceiling potential about him that's at another level when he does play in the midfield, that does make it scary for the percentage of coaches that are choosing not to start him for whatever those reasons are. And again, I think there's a valid reason for it, which we'll unpack in a sec. But 16% of super coaches, 30% of Dream Team, and 26% of AFL fantasy coaches are finding the salary cap space to include him. But if what you said is true, that he starts strong because of the midfield role and then pushes back, people will be paying not just for the 110 he is now, they'll be potentially paying up to the 115, not getting that 50K cheaper that they're hoping for at round 4, 5, and 6. That could be someone that now becomes unattainable to justify spending up for that early in the season.
I think there's some guys, and I'm sure you've mentioned it a few times in the 50 most relevant, there's some guys that can take a season away from you, for better or worse. This is one guy that if you don't start with him, he could take the season away from you and you'll be chasing constantly and potentially overpaying for him at some point in the first half of the season. So I think in my mind, my narrative, there's more risk not selecting him than selecting him. There's hardly any downsides. I've been trying to pick holes at it. You need to have a really strong reason why, if not the biggest reason why. You need to have the most certainty in those guys you're paying, big top dollar for. And I'm very certain in it. I hope we've painted a strong picture for that. I don't see many negatives outside of, freak accidents or bad karma, which, as we said, he does not deserve any more of, to not pick him. And that's across all formats, I think.
Yeah, I think that the two reasons you're opting away from Docherty is I don't believe that I think I'll get him cheaper in the year. Yeah, well, you can say that about every upper tier premium, and there's only 1 or 2 that you could genuinely probably get at that price point. So if you're going, I'll get Cornelio at a cheaper price, hopefully he drops, or I'll get a Laird at a cheaper price, hopefully he drops. I'll get Oliver at a cheaper price, hopefully he drops. I'll get English. You won't have that many cash generation moments to justify getting all those many, and there will be somebody that pops, whether it be a tag game, an injury happens, something affects their scoring and they become the priority upgrade that trumps over it. That's what makes this game fun, is you can build your plans and then at the end of the day, they can all completely fall apart. But the 2 reasons I think you can find a reason not to go for Docherty. One is there's something about that broader defensive line that you've decided based on your structure. You're going heavier in the forwards because of the more safe premiums, quote unquote, in your view, and the midfield premiums you don't want to skimp. So the back line becomes the place you don't get those upper guys, because outside of Docherty and Dream Team and Fantasy, I think you could say there is a blanket over a number of our defenders. In SuperCoach, generally, yes. And outside of Docherty and Dream Team and Fantasy, that might give away my thoughts, by the way. But outside of him in Dream Team and Fantasy, I think you could put a blanket on others. So it might be right. I'll build through the Hayden Youngs, the Nick Dacosses, the Bailey Dales. I'll build through the value of the Salems and the Yos, and I'll get him because structurally, it's how I get my side the balance. So I would understand that narrative. I don't maybe necessarily agree, but I'd understand the narrative. The other is this. As close as Carlton got to finals last year, and as good as they looked in patches last year, they did not make where a club with the players they have, with the amount of all Australians and talent they've got on the list, not to be making finals again is criminal. And so was it the game style? Was it a lack of cohesion at the end of the year? Ultimately, the club internally, as footy watchers and fans and the fantasy community, we can have our own objectives, but things didn't work in the end for Carlton. Was it injury list? All those things, sure, okay, but there's got to be an evolution of the game style of what we saw last year. They can't just roll it out. And so if the narrative that they move the ball faster, if they apply a little more surge mentality like we have seen from other teams. Geelong got rid of some of the possession heavy and pushed themselves to a final. We've seen Richmond, Collingwood, Brisbane to a lesser extent. These teams that push deep into finals play less possession heavy. If that happens, that might clip some of the ceiling off Docherty. Remember, we talked about him 6th in the league for uncontested possessions and 20th for marks. So that would be the only reason it holds water, but I don't see anyone wanting to not have any piece of Docherty during the year. Whether you start him and you just build around it and you don't care what happens, or you're finding a reason to get into him. If you don't have Docherty in your plans this year, you're in trouble.
Totally agree. And I think coming to your points there, you're right. The only real alternative as to why you wouldn't would be structure.
Yeah.
If you're not looking for that anchor, you're going for more value, or you prefer, you think Dawson or Angus Brayshaw perhaps have a bit more value, or some of those younger guys. And that's a totally personal decision, right? You need to ultimately be the one to have that narrative and sleep at night and be comfortable with that. And that's fine. I've never come first in AFL fantasy, so I'm certainly not the best person to, predict how that's going to shake out. But I think coming to the Blues, their plans and the way they're going to play, I think 2022 was a really good indication of how Voss wanted to play, focusing on that midfield strength and fast ball movement into the forward line, getting, Harry and Charlie to market and trying to score. We created a lot of scoring opportunities. Unfortunately, couldn't, hold it in for as long and convert to goals as much. But I think the next element of that will be better transition football and holding on to it, a bit tightening up on basics and hitting a bit more. So I'm pretty strong and confident that we're not going to go towards a less possession Richmond, 2022 Geelong style. I don't think that's phase 2 of Voss's fan. I could be wrong.
No, well, that's what the preseason is. That's what the preseason games are for. What are we seeing? What are we noticing? And again, at time of doing this 50 most relevant, all we know is 2022 data and the things that seep out of clubs that are the narratives they want told. We really get to see things when it's no longer just you playing against each other and you're allowing your systems to function the way you want them to. There's the variable of opposition that comes through there, and so we will see a change. I'm with you. I don't see a drastic overhaul of what Carlton is doing, and it's for that reason I struggle to find a way in Dream Team to not want to start him. In SuperCoach, I could see why. There are a bunch of other names through there that you might fancy more. You might go, oh no, I like Sinclair and Sicily and Stewart and Dawson. Yeah, okay, no worries. But everybody keeps talking about chasing value across the formats. And that's not necessarily wrong. But it's not just about chasing bang for your buck. You also want the best players in their lines in your team for as long as possible. And we talked about this with Rids on an episode around Rory Laird, that they're priced at what they're priced at this level because it's what they've done. So you're not chasing Docherty because he's value. That's not his job, although you could argue he's got some if he has those centre bounce scoring like he did last year. You're chasing him and selecting him because you believe he's clear and supreme, one of, if not the best defenders this year, and you can build around him. Still, while value and chasing it matters, at the end of the day, success in this game does come from owning the best players for as long as possible. Yes, trading into guys at the right time, absolutely. Yes, hunting value, absolutely. Do not discount getting the best possible players and owning them for as long as possible. I believe in Dream Team and AFL Fantasy, Docherty is clear and supreme the best defender this year. I don't see anyone getting within 5 points per game of him unless something drastic changes. And that's what we're forecasting for in February. I can't see it. So for me in those two formats, I'm building it around him as an anchor. In SuperCoach, you can see there's 3 or 4 others around him, and I'd understand if you like them more. It might hit a structure or an element or a factor. That's fine. But at the end of the day, come round 24, if not a lot earlier than that, we're all going to want Doc on our side, aren't we, McRath?
We certainly will, mate. Every single game, all the salary formats, draft as well. He's in every team I have. And I don't know, some selections you just can't afford to be cute. You've just got to lock them in and throw away the trade button. And I think Doc's one of those guys this year.
He's such a fascinating bloke. We're struggling in some portions of the community to find a way to justify spending the big dollars. And if you are locking him away early, you're looking at him as a VC or a C option early days. If he's not that for you, then fade on him as a starting option. From a reference point, AFL Fantasy and Dream Teamers, his last 3 against the Tigers, who he plays round 1, is 91, 95 and 129 for what it's worth. By the way, though...
And he's got a couple of loophole games, that fixture.
That's exactly right. The good thing is, if we are looking at him, though, the last time he played them was when he had that 129 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team. So not a bad way to have a vice-captaincy option in the first game of the year. Let's talk about drafts and where he goes. Probably different in each format, more because he looks clear and supreme in Dream Team and Fantasy, and there's a few around the mark in him in SuperCoach. On draft day, McRath, this is a bit more of your specialty space. He's a D1, no doubt, but where's he going?
Well, fresh annual draft, I'd be looking to take him in the second half of the first round, to be honest. He's going to be the D1, clearly. I think there's upside there. And for the reasons that people are picking Dunkley as an absolute unanimous pick 1, I think you could do the same for Doc as a defender, albeit not at pick 1. But honestly, I think his range is anywhere from pick 3 to pick 10. I think if he lasts to the end of the first round, you're absolutely laughing. In SuperCoach draft, I'd probably be taking him as anywhere from the first to the fourth defender off the ball, which depending on how things fall, it might be in the first 2 or 3 rounds of your draft. But look, at the end of the day, if you do end up with him, you won't be unhappy. You'll feel good and warm and fuzzy because he's just such a legendary bloke. There's no DH factor with him. You'll sleep soundly, and he'll give you consistent scores all the way to around 24. Yeah,
I'm with you on the Dream Team and Fantasy call. I think you pretty much in that mid to early first round. Yeah, you can lock him in if you like. He's not a number 1 pick, but gosh, depending on where you land, he's a great option. I agree. In SuperCoach, he's in that clump of 5, and I would happily let the right one fall to me. And so you've got guys like Stewart, Sinclair, Sicily, Docherty, and Dawson, what appear to be a popular top 5. For me, depending on where you're drafting in that second round, I'd happily let the right one fall to me. If you're hoping to get him, though, in the third round, okay, you're really flirting with danger, my friends. He's not going to last that long for you on draft day. Hey, McRath, loved having you on this episode and talking about, no doubt, what people have picked up throughout this episode, one of your favourite players to own in 2023.
He certainly is, mate. Such a pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate getting you on, and hopefully everyone enjoyed some of the insights and the discussion. He's a guy that I could certainly talk about for hours. So, hopefully everyone enjoyed it, and we'll talk again soon, mate. Enjoy the rest of your preseason.
We definitely will. He's at number 5. 4 players left to go in the 50 most relevant. If you want to go and follow McRath on Twitter, all the details are attached in the descriptions of this podcast. You can go in there, click that, and follow him across Twitter. If you're loving the episodes you've got from this podcast or others, right throughout the preseason, we've been dropping daily episodes of the 50 most relevant. Wherever you're streaming or have downloaded this podcast from, you can go and check the other players that we have revealed so far. All other 45 beyond Doc are available wherever you're getting this podcast. And of course, there is a corresponding article that goes with every single one of these players. All the links for them you can find at coachespanel.tv, which is also where you can go and get involved in our Patreon supporter group for just a couple of bucks a month. Not only does it practically help us do what we do here at the Coaches Panel, it also gives you access to hidden groups, exclusive content, articles, podcasts, and the works. All the details to join our Patreon supporter group, you can find that at coachespanel.tv. All right, we're getting in the real serious part of the 50 most relevant now. The final 4 players of the 50 most relevant. Tomorrow, who have I got at number 4? Over the past 3 seasons, this guy has been one player that if you didn't own in SuperCoach, you didn't have a good season. Over the past handful of years in AFL Fantasy, he's been one of the most reliable, durable, and consistent premiums that we've got available to us. He's got a tough start to the year, but I think he's good enough that doesn't bother him. Who is this premium that has been so good for so long that we just assume is going to be great again? We'll talk about him tomorrow in the 50 most relevant.